suppose that could have been a little better. We'll try it again. So we're doing something different today. We're doing, instead of a letter, we're doing a combination of two letters, Nun Samek, and it has something to do with adoration and praise and glory and adornment. It also has something to do with a fluttering flag, so that's why all this has to do with. And the word Sheen Nun, is a two-letter word also, which has something to do with teeth, or like the sawtooth mountains of the Tetons, which is why the background is there, and the flowers in the beginning has to do with this colorful adornment. So anyway, I will be drawing some things on the board here, but the reason why we're doing Nun Samek has to do with the same reason why we had a Selah week in between the Zayin and the Chet. So the first 7 letters, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, like there's 7 weeks, or 7 festivals, 7 days in the week. So there's this natural pause at the Zayin. And the Zayin is the letter that's a weapon, which means to cut, or to cut off, or something which is cut off or separated from something else. The letter Het, being the 8th letter, is a fence. Well, a fence is not just an enclosure, it's also a barricade. It's also something that's fenced or secluded off from whatever else was against it or before it. So you have this natural break between the Zayin and the Chet. So the Zayin is kind of like a gatekeeper or a guard or a restriction from getting into the Chet. So we had a Selah, or a week. And Selah means stop and think about it, or to pause. It's a suspension in the music. So the week of the Selah, we had the imagery of the harps in the willow trees. And if you use the Red Dictionary, which we've been encouraging people to make use of, by Ernest Klein, that we've been having some access to sell. It's published by Carta Jerusalem there. If you start looking up some of these words, I can't go into all the details, but I'm trying to point you in the direction of what words to look up. So if you look up the word for willow, and you look up the word for harp, if you look up the word for Selah, you'll see a relationship between all these things. And some of the imagery that we're trying to use and the colors and the different things I'm trying to wear is to just stick in your mind to make you picture something is while you're looking up these words. The Mishkan pattern has the first 7 letters kind of out in front, and then it starts with the fence. But what I found in the Mishkan pattern, which is what this chart here shows, and I'm kind of going over this as a rehearsal. We weren't here last week, and we're just trying to kind of going back and enveloping a few things that we talked about before we get into what we're doing today and forward. But in this chart, there's the black here, and then there's the blue of the fence, the purple of the Kaf Lamed, which is the altar of sacrifice, the red of the Mem Nun. The last couple of weeks we did Mem and Nun. And then there's Samek and Pei in the white, and the Zadi is in the gold, and then there's the black again in the position of the Kuf, just like there's the black in the Vav Zayin. The reason for that is that kind of embodies the Mishkan pattern. The premise of this whole talk, of this whole class that we're doing, is that a lot of people know what the letters mean. In fact, in this dictionary, at the beginning of each letter, the title page for that letter, it'll tell you what the letter means. And it'll tell you that the shape of the letter in the ancient form had something to do with the meaning of the letter. As a matter of fact, if you look at the word for noon, it'll say, well, the noon means fish. But yet you look at, I was looking today, and you can't find Nun Vav Nun, the spelling of noon, where it says, oh, this is what fish is. As a matter of fact, fish is Dalet Gimel, dag, or dog. It's not noon. Well, then why do they think it's noon? But then it says, well, it's related to noon, yod noon, nin. Like, if you looked up noon, yod noon, you'll see it means to sprout or increase. And you'll also see that it says, some ancient scholars suggest that it's a metaphor of the Mashiach, the Messiah. It's like, why would that be? Well, you might say there's a connection there with John the Baptist saying he must increase and I must decrease, which is actually the reason, from what I understand, why the Catholic Church chose to have Christmas when Jesus was born at the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year, the shortest day of the year, the most darkness, because from that day on, the sunlight is increasing. And so then they celebrate John the Baptist's birthday at the summer solstice, because that's the longest day of the year, and so the light is diminishing. So metaphorically, with a picture you might say, they say, well, because John the Baptist said, I must decrease, that will have his birthday be the longest day of the year, so it's always decreasing, and Jesus' birthday being December 25th, or the winter solstice, so the light's increasing. So even the appropriation of these special days that the church has declared is metaphorical. But what we're trying to do is say, well, what do these letters really mean? So if you say, well, a noon is a fish, it doesn't say fish, that's dag. But nin means to sprout or increase, and so, well, if Yeshua must increase, how come we don't see that says fish when we look in the dictionary? So what I'm suggesting is that there's puzzles. And so the purpose of the class is to try to show you the nature of the puzzle and to give you some tools to do your own puzzle work or to find your own part of the mystery. We'll go into quite a bit of other detail here in a minute, but the premise of this class again is to say, I believe that the Mishkan pattern is the key to the whole thing, meaning that there's a correlation of the Mishkan to the 7 days of creation, to the 7 festivals. That's the key to the meaning of the letters of the alphabet. So what I'm saying here is different than anything I've heard anybody else say, and you can go on the internet and you can look at the meanings of the letters, and I haven't found this. Now maybe somebody else is saying this, but I haven't heard him say this, so that makes this perspective unique. And so the reason why this class is happening is to say, someone may disagree. Someone may say, well, that's not what the scholars or the scribes or the sages have ever said. Doesn't matter. I determined that this pattern fits, and as I've looked through all the different verses of studying out the way words are constructed, I found that it holds, that it works. So someone else may disagree, someone else may have a different pattern, but what I'm suggesting is, because these things are Yahweh's, the Creator's own, then this is His pattern. You see, He determined the 7 days, the sequence of the 7 days. Before there was ever man, before there was ever religion, before there was ever an interpretation of anything, He determined the 7-day sequence of creation. He also determined the 7 festivals. In Leviticus 23, He says to Israel, He says, these are my festivals which I'm giving you. They are not Jewish holidays. It just so happens that Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, the kingdom of Yehuda, the southern kingdom, the people who are of the regard of the Jewish cultural traditions, are the only people apparently on the face of the earth that care a whit about Yahweh's festivals, so they're the only ones that have kept them until now. Other people who are not of Jewish tradition or Jewish descent, like us here, have decided to regard with value Yahweh's words, Yahweh's revelation, Yahweh's commandments, His observances. He said, these are my festivals. Observe them. Keep them. Value them. Give them regard, honor, and esteem. So those of us in this class and listening and people that go to various fellowships that are represented by the people here have decided to do that. It's not Christian. It's not Jewish. It's simply, let's see what Yahweh said and do them. So the fact that Yahweh said these are my festivals means He invented them, He designed them, He sequenced them. He put them according to their seasons. The word Moedim is season. It's also appointed place of meeting. It's also the call to assembly. It's the word Moedim. So when you read in the book of Genesis in the first week of creation, day 4, that he put the stars in the sky according to their seasons, it's also according to their placements or their called assembly. It's also the festivals. He put the stars in the sky according to the festivals. That's a whole different way to read it. We could go on and talk about that. That's more in the position of the letter Psalmic next week. But what I'm saying is that this pattern fits the festivals because I found that there's a correlation between the 7 days and the 7 festivals. You might say like this, here's 5 fingers. Well, we're picturing 7, right? There's a pattern of 7, not just 5, but we'll use the analogy of 5. And here's another pattern of 7. 7 festivals, 7 days. You might say, well, those are 2 completely different things. But when you see them a certain way, they match like this. And the Mishkan pattern itself, the tabernacle is the word Mishkan, which we discussed before, previous weeks. It fits like this also. So the point is, the Mishkan was given to Moshe when he was on Mount Sinai, and Yahweh said, make sure you make the Mishkan, have the Levites make it, make the Mishkan exactly like the pattern of the one that I showed you, the heavenly Mishkan, the pattern. So this was not Moshe's design. This was not his invention. He didn't think this up. I heard recently that he copied some stuff that was going on in Egypt to design the Mishkan on the face of the earth and have the Israelites worship there. That's not true. It's not according to the story, nor does it recognize the fact that this was the Creator's own design. And so if you think that way, you've now spun off, you're off the track, you're off the roadway, as it were, and you're completely lost. And anything that comes out of that line of thinking is going to be so wrong, so erroneous, you'll never find your way back onto the path of the truth. So here's the point. What do the letters mean? Well, if you look at ancient history, it's a given from as far back as anybody knows that Aleph is an ox. In fact, the word Aleph means ox. It also means a team of oxen, or to be domesticated like oxen and to be part of the family. Bet is a house. It means in, like you go into a house, so it represents the family that's in the house. Gimel is the word camel. It's the 3rd letter, like the English letter C, and the word camel starts with the letter C. And literally, the word Gimel means camel. That's the 3rd letter. Dalet, Lamed is to hang. Well, the door hangs on hinges. The Dalet is the door, the 4th letter, so forth and so on. We've gone through all this. And if you think that Aleph is an ox, Bet is a house, Gimel is a camel, Dalet's a door, and then you try to make a story, well, you could probably make up a story weaving those through. But when you get into the Mishkan pattern, and you see that all these things fit, when you get to the letter Het, it represents, or it lines up with the representation of the big white fence around the Mishkan. And what I found is that Het, Tet, and Yod all are the name of the Creator, or it's the name of the kingdom. The name who's, like on your house, you'll have a house number and maybe your last name, and it's like, this is who lives here. So Het, Tet, and Yod represent this is whose kingdom it is. Kaf and Lamed line up with the altar of sacrifice, which has to do with a filtering system. So if you look at a barbecue grill like lines, some stuff like the meat stays up on top and other things drip through. That's a filtering mechanism. A shower grate or a drain on the floor. Some stuff stays here and some stuff doesn't. It's a filtering mechanism. So Kaf is a filtering mechanism. The letter Lamed is like the heart in that it's a pump. It means to push or pull or to teach and learn. So Kaf and Lamed line up with this instructions of teaching and learning the instructions. Mem Nun lines up with the laver, which has to do with this bowl containing water that was made out of the mirrors of the women. The women took their mirrors, which were actually polished brass. They weren't glass mirrors, they were polished brass. And they made this laver out of them. And so there's something about the Mem and Nun which has to do with a reflection of your life. Well, the noon is like a child being born out of mem, a womb, and the child being born is a reflection of the parents. So there's this imagery going on. The first festival of Pesach is Passover, which is like the Het Tet and Yod. Yahweh says, I took you out of Egypt, you are mine. So it has to do with this is who owns this business. This is the fence of the kingdom of heaven. The next festival, Chag Matzot, the festival of unleavened bread, is where you filter out, you discriminate between that which is leavened and that which is not leavened. So it's like the Kaf and Lamed. The third festival, Shavuot, counting of weeks, you count 7 sevens, you count for 7 weeks, and then the 50th day is the day of the last festival, the festival day. Pentecost in Greek means count 50, or 50 count, Penta is 50 actually. So that's like the noon jumping out of the gestation period, the pregnancy period. The incubation is like in the mem, and then the birthing is jumping out of the noon. Well, these 3 articles in the tabernacle were in the courtyard. There's the big white fence with a restricted entry. You couldn't just walk right in. If you were in contact with the dead, you had to be cleansed with the ashes of the red heifer. Then you have these 3 things. You have the big white fence, the altar of sacrifice, and the laver, and that was in the courtyard. Then you have what's called the set-apart place. It's called the holy place in English, but it's the kadosh place that was under a tent. And inside that, you've got the menorah, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. 3 things. And then there was a veil, and then it was the most set apart, or the kadosh kodashim. It's technically in English called the Holy of Holies, and the only thing in there was the Ark of the Covenant. And in the Ark of the Covenant is the table of the stone 10 Commandments. Now, when Yahweh was present, there was this pillar of fire and pillar of smoke above the Ark of the Covenant. So the pick, that's the Mishkan pattern right there. So the way this lines up with the letters of the alphabet and the days of creation is that when you have darkness as a present status quo, and he says, let there be light. That's like the present status quo of being in misery and Mitzrayim, which is the word Egypt. Mitzrayim, it sounds like misery. It's in Zadi Resh Zar, it's like these straits, these confined pressures, squeezing you. It's like, I just need some relief. It also lines up the Beatitudes of the same pattern. Yeshua said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The poverty, or in straits of distress, he said, here's the offer of the kingdom of heaven. That lines up with Pesach, where Yahweh said, I will relieve you from your... Zadi Resh is also where we get the word Tsar, or Kaiser, or Caesar. The Caesars who are oppressing you, the tyrants of the world who would take Yahweh's people. And Yahweh said, remember, oh, you don't want me to be your Elohim? Oh, you want them to rule over you? Tell you what, your curse is that you get to have exactly what you want. All your wishes come true. You can have them be your dominators, tyrannical overlords. You get to have what you want. If it's not me, it's going to be them. So you want them? You can have them. Yahweh is gracious enough to say we get to have exactly what we want. The benefit of this, reading this Hebrew, is that I found many words that say, he will also let us come back home. That's what this is about. How do we get back to where we once belonged, to coin a phrase. The thing is, so the darkness outside the fence, the place of the Zion, the place of the weapon, the place of the overlords that would oppress us, the darkness, the place of death, the place of bondage, the place of slavery, the place of destitution, you might say, the poor in spirit. Because of the Vav man, Zion, which I believe to be Yeshua on the stake, on the cross, Yeshua crucified, because of him, he allows us entry. He's like the keeper of the gate. He's like the bouncer at the door with restricted entry, and because of him, at his allowance, we're allowed in. Because of the red heifer sacrifice, the ashes of the red heifer, outside the gate, those in contact with the dead who are contaminated were decontaminated and allowed to come in. Pesach didn't forgive anybody any sins. What Pesach did was cut loose the chains of the oppressor so that we could be free to be Yahweh's flock, Yahweh's own people, and to be taken to the place of Mount Sinai, where then he gave us instructions, which lines up with unleavened bread, where he says, now these are my ways. You see, you don't earn entry into his kingdom by keeping his ways. You can't keep his ways because you're under oppression of others telling you what to do. But once you enter his kingdom, you learn his ways. So the picture model of Kaf and Lamed are these are the ways of Yahweh, the instructions. I hold up my hand like this because the letter Kaf is an open hand, and it's things that are lined. And remember, we had the week of, we had the palm branches, because that's a picture of Kaf, the lines. A rainbow, a spectrum, radiant lines is all a picture of Kafness, you might say. So Kaf is also something cut. The point is, the lines of instruction, if you read a Torah scroll, is like they're lines of instructions. That's the Kaf. That's his gift, the open hand. That's also the covering. The word kippah or kippur, the covering. The word atonement, kippur, is also the open hand. Moshe said, Yahweh, show me your glory, or show me your kavod, the esteem of your honor. And he says, no man can see my face and live, but I'll show you my backside. He put him in the cleft of the rock. And he says, I'll put my kaf over you. I'll put my hand over you and pass by, and I'll show you my backside. Well, the letter kuf means backside. So he put kafi on Moshe. He put kafi on him. What does that mean? Kaf is hand, kaf-e, with the yod at the end means my hand. He always said, I will put kafi on you. I'll put my hand on you. That's a little Hebrew joke. Point is, he put kafi on Moses, then he passed by, he took the kafi off, and Moses was able to see his kuf view. So you got the kaf view, which is lines of instruction, the kuf view, like the back side, the back of the head. We'll get to that in a couple weeks. I'm just trying to throw some words out so you will be familiar with things, so they won't sound strange when I'm trying to get there. So the point is, the kaf view, putting the kaf over you, this covering, this atonement, allows you to see the glory that's allowed to be seen. You can't see his face, but you can see his backside, the kuf view. Well, there's this pillar of fire, pillar of smoke above the Ark of the Covenant. That could be seen. As a matter of fact, it stood between the camp of Israel and the camp of Egypt. And the Egyptians couldn't get past it. It was a pretty spectacular thing. This swirling pillar of fire and this billowing smoke, and it held them off. So you could say, well, that was an evident thing that Yahweh showed, but the kaf, which is his lines of Torah instruction, is also something he showed of his esteem, of his glory. And he said, and now I'm playing with the words, if we regard his kaf, lines of instruction, then we're looking at it, we're covered by it. Then we look up, and it's, you look away from the kaf being over you, and you can see his pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, kuf view. You understand what I'm saying? It's like one trains your eyes, as it were, metaphorically, pictorially speaking, to be able to see the other. And not be afeared of it in the sense of the Egyptians were afraid, but fearing in the sense of honor. The word is yirah, Yod Resh Aleph. If you look through this book and study these words, you'll see these things. I'm just throwing these out so you'll get some understanding of it. So either you're going to be fearing Yahweh in terms of honor and respect, or you're going to fear him in terms of terror and intrepidation and horrified at his presentation of himself. We'll get to that word. I'm mentioning these words for a reason, tying into things later. So here you have Mem Nun then lining up with Shavuot, which has to do with, well, that comes after the Kaf and Lamed. Well, what comes after the instructions? It has to do with believing the promises. If you look through the book of Judges, Joshua, Yahweh gets upset when his people didn't trust him. He said, I told you I'd take out your enemies. Why don't you trust me? Every time they got afraid of their enemies, Yahweh took it personally. You see, believing the promises is different than regarding the instructions. They're two different matters. But believing the promises is just as important to him as getting the instructions and regarding them. So the Kaf and Lamed are part of the pattern, like the barbecue grill, the altar of sacrifice, where you're just learning the processing instructions, teaching and learning over and over, filtering, going through. What do you say? How do you say? So I said the other weeks that it was kind of like the Constitution and the Supreme Court. The Constitution is this is what it says, and the Supreme Court says this is how it's applied. That's one issue. That's Kaf and Lamed. That's like the purple. That's like the royal decrees. That's like Chag HaMatzot, the unleavened bread. That's like day 2, where he said he separated the water from the water. He separated the leaven from leaven. Okay, then you get to day 3, which is the Mem Nun, which has to do with believing the promises. He says, when you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you keep my word, this is the covenant, I will defend you from your enemies. I will give your enemies fear about you. I will make the weather cooperate. I will make the animals cooperate. I will make the plant life cooperate. He'll make everything work. But see, that takes time. You don't see it right away. That's like the memming, developing. What's going to happen if we Kaf Lamed? And so the way to correct what's happening on the face of the world today, it's not like, what do we do right now today? We can't fix what's happening today unless we go back to the instructions, Kaf Lamed, in which case I believe he will fix it, or the fact that we're regarding his instructions will cause a fix. The question is, how many of who should do what for how long with what heart before it'll take an effect? And if you think about each part of that, I'm not suggesting that the whole world has to keep the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were a ketubah. They were prenuptial agreements between Yahweh and his betrothed. It has nothing to do with being an ecclesiastical mace to bludgeon those who were never participant in the relationship. But that's what it's been used as. So I could say the world doesn't have to keep the 10 Commandments. It's a prenuptial agreement between Yahweh and Israel. Why should those be the list of tools to beat them and to force them into conformity for something they, the others, the ones who are not in relationship with Yahweh, have nothing to do with? It was never part of the agreement. So anybody who says, we ought to have the 10 Commandments be the law of this land, that was never Yahweh's idea. The 10 Commandments were an agreed set of terms of relationship between Yahweh and his betrothed. And we talked before that the word betrothed is where we get the word truth, which is where you get the concept of a vow. And with this vow came terms of, this is what's going to happen if you keep them, this is what's going to happen if you don't. Simply put, it's the blessing and the curse. But what the curse looks like, it's in Deuteronomy 28, it's also near the end of Leviticus, near the end of Exodus, you can go back and read it. It's horrific. What the curse looks like the Inquisition, the Holocaust, and many other things that have happened on the face of the earth, all rolled into one. You read what Yahweh said would happen to his people, and it says, I'm going to allow this to happen or cause this to happen. Yahweh's really serious. He made it so bad you can't imagine anybody in the right mind ever even thinking of going there, yet Israel went there running. And hence we have the history of the world being a terrible, terrible thing. So the question is, people talk. You hear, my whole life I've heard from the Christian thing that, boy, we're right at the end of the world. The end of the world should happen momentarily. 88 reasons why Jesus should come back in 1988 and that kind of a thing, and by the year 2000 and whatever it might be. And it's like, but I keep reading where Yahweh says, I promised that I would turn this whole thing around, that I would bring my people back, that I would give my people the blessing. I can't see it happening yet. People say, oh, well, Israel becoming a state, becoming a nation, should be like, that's the evidence at the end of the world. And it's like, is it? The secular government of Israel does not keep the Torah. In fact, someone was just telling me the other day that they voted in their parliament to negate the Torah or to keep it out of their political concerns. It is not a state of Torah-observant men of Israel. The nation state of Israel right now is not a Torah-observant accomplishment of the prophecies for Yahweh to bring his people back to the land on his terms according to his ketubah. So can it even be a sign of the end times? We're told it is by people who can't read, can't count, don't believe the Torah, and have lied to us many times. Why do we then base our eschatology, our hope, and our expectation on things these people say? It makes no sense. The only thing we can believe is what this word says. But we don't know how to read. The purpose of this class is to say, what do these words mean? So we can read, so we can determine. If you don't believe the Vatican, if you don't believe the church elders and teachers, if you don't believe the rabbis, and if you don't believe the other religions, then the burden is upon every one of us to look at these words, determine what these words mean, and then hold ourselves accountable to fulfill them, and then maybe the promises of what Yahweh said. I don't mean maybe, I mean for sure the promises of what Yahweh says will be manifest, will happen. The burden is upon us. I can only show you what I see. I can only encourage one another to say, hey, let's do this. It's an encouragement of each other. But the burden is on us. We can't point at our forefathers because the scriptures say our forefathers inherited lies, but they're actually not lies. They're twisted things. They're vain things. It says without profit. What it means is nothing comes of it. It's like a genetically modified seed that can't reproduce. And then the following verse says, will a man make for himself Elohim that are not Elohim? They're not Elohim. In other words, Yahweh said, here's 7 festivals. I invented them, and I am all about life. Het Yod means life. It also means my kingdom. What it says is, if the message is in the Word, you could say, Yahweh's kingdom is life, is living. Everything lives in Yahweh's kingdom. So he said, here's 7 festivals. They're festivals of life. And then the church comes along and says, in order to honor Jesus, we're going to change the festivals and have Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. Those are not Yahweh's festivals. They're not life. Are they Elohim? Are they godly? Are they things of Yahweh? No. So you can keep them with a good intent, but there's no life. There's no profit. It's like planting a seed which has been genetically modified or irradiated. It can't reproduce its kind. It can't. It's been messed with by human scientific tweaking to make it better according to the aims and intentions of the ones doing the mucking around. But according to the aims and intentions of the Creator, if they're not of His design, they're void. So by quoting Scripture saying, we have inherited only lies, vain things from our forefathers who were lied to, tricked, deceived, stumbled, and or went wayward intentionally off the track, we are coming back to these things because these are the things of life. The letter Nun basically means sprout or increase, right? So the letter Nun means that which is alive, but also then the Psalmic is a support structure. We'll go into that next week. So one way to read Nun Psalmic is life support. This is a life support system. So here we have the Mem Nun, like the laver. You see reflection, you see yourself, you see what comes out. It all has to do with image of yourself. There's more and more about that. See, each one of these classes could be 10 times longer than it is. There's so much information here. But the thing to look at is that the spring feasts line up with Pesach, Hag Matzot, and Shavuot. Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost, the counting of the 50 days. Those are the spring festivals. Then there's a break, the summer months. Then there's the 7th month, and the festivals in the fall, in the harvest time, lining up with Samech Ayin Pei, which is Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Wait a minute, that's 6 festivals. See what they do, and I see this all the time. You look at anybody telling you what the 7 festivals are, and they break Shavuot into 2 festivals. There's the first day, which is the waving of the Omer, which is the cut sheaf. They count 50 days. And then there's Bikurim, or Pentecost, counting 50, which is a mandatory non-work celebration day. And they say, well, that's one festival, and there's another festival. So they end the 3 festivals in the fall with Sukkot. But that's not what it says. If you read closely, Yahweh says the 3rd festival is counting 50 days, starting with this one and ending with this one. And so the way I see this is you're memming 49 days, and the 50th day is the noon. And then in the fall, it's Samech Ayin Pei, it's Sukkot. Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. The 10th day, the first day is Yom Teruah of the 7th month. Then the 10th day is Yom Kippur, Kippur covering. And then you've got the 7 days of Sukkot. But it says the 8th day is a gathering, an assembly. It's called Shemini, that's the word 8. Atzeret is a gathering. It's not Sukkot. It's its own festival of gathering. It's always forgotten. Kind of like it's the 7th festival, always forgotten. That's the pattern. Kind of like Shabbat is always forgotten and people disregard it. It's Saturday, the day for sports and shopping and playing. There's a model here. Here's my point. If you bump Shemini Atzeret and call Shavuot 2 festivals, you'll end up with 7. But the pattern won't match, and it won't match the alphabet. So here's my point. If this truly is the key to the code, then what you map the letters to makes all the difference in breaking the code. So if we have Het through Noon being the spring feast, Pesach, Hag Matzot, Shavuot, and then you've got this break, and then you've got the fall feast, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, lining up with Samek, Ayin, Pei, Zadi, and then over it is a pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, which isn't a festival, but it's like the letter Kuf, our letter Q, which is the circle and the vertical. It lines up. It's like the pillar of fire, the vertical, and the pillar of smoke, the circular thing. It's kind of like the question mark and the exclamation point that covered over the camp. The pattern fits. But if the pattern fits, then you can appropriate Yahweh's things to what the words mean, what the letters mean. So there's a break between the Nun and the Samek, because the Samek, Ayin Pei, is inside the tent, the Kadosh place. The Kaf Lamed Mem Nun are out here in the courtyard. So there's a natural break. That's why this week we're having a break. Last week was the Nun. Next week will be the Samek. So this week we're doing Nun Samek. See, there's a verse in the Psalms. Let's see if I can quote it correctly. I have it written down, but it basically says, I have given a banner to those that love me on account of the truth. And my wife was looking that up. And so she made this banner over here with the Nun Samek with the letters around it. But the word truth there is not Aleph Mem Tav. On this explanation of the chart here, I included this. Kuf Shin Tet. It's down here. It says menorah as the hilt of the blazing sword of the Messiah, fletchings. Well, this concept of this word for truth being Kuf Shin Tet is kind of like fletchings, and then this word chatzi means basically my arrows. But this notion of fletchings, those are those feathers that are on the side of an arrow to keep it straight. So when he says, I've given a banner to those that fear me or love me on account of the truth, that word truth is not just as we might think in English, oh, that's something true. That's like more like emet. But this word kashet is kufshin tet, is that those two things which keep it running straight as aimed. So here's, in this picture, the imagery here is like the two houses of Israel. Ephraim and Yehuda, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. And all through the scriptures you can find two witnesses. Two witnesses are established before somebody can be condemned for a crime. Heaven and earth were declared as the witness. And this one time we had a party over at our house. I don't know if you remember, you were there. Remember, we had the whiteboard set up, and we had people try to think of all the things where there was two witnesses. And I thought there may be a few. We had like 50 of them written up. It's like, wow. This thing of having two witnesses is all over the scriptures. It's like having arrows or feathers on both sides of the arrow to keep it straight. So it's kind of like Yeshua, the center of the menorah, having the two sides. So here's this image of the menorah, right? You have like these wings. You have the kenafim. You have these wings are like the fletchings of the straight path, which is basically what this is a picture of, but this is a different matter. I just wanted to bring this to your attention as the imagery, so that when you read certain words, if you know what they mean, you'll get other pictures which start to put things together. So if he has these, if he says, I have lifted up, I've given a banner to be raised up on account of the truth. The word banner literally is Nun Samek. Nun Samek is a fluttering flag. That's why we had the flag fluttering. Shin Nun is not only means teeth. Shin can also means to consume, like the letter Shin, but it's also something way off in the distance that you look forward to, that you're trying to find, like the peak of a mountain sticking up like a tooth, or conceptually. We talked once before about the word Ebenezer. There was a song they sing in church, I will raise my Ebenezer. And we talked a bit humorously that nobody seems to know what an Ebenezer is. The word is Even ha-azar. The word Eben is actually stone, like a stone that hits the statue that knocks the statue over. And azar is the word, same word for wife or helpmeet, or that which surrounds or encompasses. And it's also a helper, like a picture frame. The frame or the mat around a picture helps the picture. It makes the picture look better and, gives it something to hang on. So putting a wrapping around as a bandage is also an azar. And you can look through the dictionary and find all these other things. So the point is, well, how do you raise an Ebenezer? The word Nazar is also where you get Netzarim, and there's 3 or 4 different spellings, so depending on how you spell the word, you can think about an Ebenezer, something you raise up like a flag. It's not. In the context of what Joshua said, he said, because Yahweh was their help in a battle against the Philistines, it says he put a stone, wrote these things on it, put oil on it, I believe, and he said he put it between Mizpah and the coast, or between Mizpah and the peak or the cliff. It's like, I thought, there must be something there. What is Mizpah? Mizpah is a watchtower, and the word for the cliff or the coast or the promontory was Shen. And I was thinking there must be a message in here. And I'm telling you this because this is how you should read the scriptures. The word Mizpah, watchtower, made me think, well, Yeshua said, watch. Watch for what? Something in the future. What's in the future? The thing in the future that you're watching for is like those Teton Mountains, that's Shinun. There's something that we're supposed to watch for. There's something that he told us as the commandment to watch, which is the word Mizpah, which is the watchtower. What is it that sustains us, Azar, between the command to watch and the thing that we're watching for, that we have a hope and an expectation for, becomes the reality. So everybody's been watching for the second coming. Everybody's been watching for the restoration of the kingdom to Israel. That's the Shinun. That's like the Teton Mountains, like these teeth. This sawtooth mountains is kind of like this picture type of the Teton Mountains. So if you look at the Teton Mountains and see Shin, you might see just teeth. You might see like this mountain, but you also might think, oh, wait a minute, we're supposed to watch for something. What are we supposed to be watching for? What sustains us between here and there? The Azar. The Eben Azar is the rock of help. The Azar is what sustains us. These other words will play into things we'll talk about in the next part. The point is, something that you raise up that he gave us is a Nun Samik. It's not an Eben Hazar. But there's various different things. We talked before about this crazy 8 concept, the card game. You can lay down a 4 diamonds. You can either play 4s or you can play diamonds. If you have neither, you can lay down an 8. You can change it to something else. So part of what we're doing in this class is saying if you know the pattern, you can start jumping around like the crazy 8 thing, like the banyan tree. This connects to that because, well, hey, I know that these things overlap. They overlap either in, like the cards, they either overlap in numbers or in suits. But once you know the meanings of words, for example, Nun Samik is a sign or a symbol or a signal, like a flag. It's a signal flag. Well, the word Aleph Vav Tav, if you look in the dictionary here, it also means a sign or a symbol. The word Sagan, like Carl Sagan, a famous astronomer, also means sign or symbol. So now, if you're going to study Nun Samik, you might also look up Aleph Vav Tav and Samik Gimel Nun. And so if we can get there, I have some of these words. If you look at Samik Gimel Nun, right, if you're looking through the dictionary, and this is the benefit of the dictionary rather than going online, is you might come across Samik Gimel Lamed, Segal, which happens to mean, like Steven Seagal, right? He's a famous movie guy. And it happens to mean treasure, possession, violet. Wait a minute, the color violet, treasured possession? What has that got to do with Sagan, which is a flag or something that you wave up to get your attention, which is similar to an azar, that which sustains you, which is like the word oat or oath. It's where we get in English the word oath. But the word oath also means a letter of the alphabet. Now you overlap all these things and put them together like the banyan tree model, and what you realize is that Yahweh has given us something to be lifted up, to sustain us, to keep us on the path of the truth, like the fletching to these arrows. What did he give us? See, we can read it and spin it with other meanings. Or we can read it and plug in our favorite doctrine given to us by our famous ecclesiastical overlord. Or we can listen to those who might benefit for Israel never knowing the truth and never coming back to the covenant, and they'll tell us it means something else, because as long as Israel doesn't come back to the covenant and doesn't do what Yahweh says to do, the powers that be will remain to be the powers that be, and Israel will never come back to the end of the age, to the end of the world, and maybe, what will happen. But I believe we can change things by simply doing what Yahweh said. But the only way to know what he said is to go back to the fletchings that he gave us, Kuf Shin Tet. Gee, what does that word spell? You look it up in the dictionary, the letters that start with Kuf Shin, Shin Tet, because each letter, we talked about this before, is like a hologram. Every letter embodies the entire picture. So as you go through this, we talked about it, this is like Sephering, connecting the dots. It sounds like maybe I'm jumping all over the place, but here's the thing. Each letter, like these dots of a constellation, around the central theme. It's a picture, if you would, a bicycle wheel, or the wheel of like an old stagecoach. You've got the central hub, you've got these spokes radiating out of it, and then you've got these things bounded around here. Can you picture that? Queen Esther's husband, I think he's otherwise known as Xerxes, Ahasuerus. His name, Ahasuerus, literally means the picture I just told you. A center hub with the spokes coming out of it, captured together in a band. It's that picture. That's the name Ahasuerus. But you wouldn't know that unless you know Hebrew. If you think, oh, that's Xerxes, the guy that was a Persian king many years ago. And where's the picture of the Mashiach? In the book of Esther. The word Yahweh is not even mentioned. But if all of a sudden you realize Yeshua himself said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men into myself. And then he also talks about being lifted up the way Moshe put the snake on the pole. Actually, it was a fiery serpent because the vipers were biting people. And he lifted it up, and those who had been bitten looked to it and were saved from their deadly, poisonous snake bite. What does that have to do with Nun Samech? The Samech is an engineered structure. It's like a pole. It's like the cross or a stake. It's a trellis. We'll get into that next week. Nun is the living thing, the living one. The living one on a stake. There's a picture of the crucifixion. There's a picture of the snake, this serpentine thing, stuck up on the pole. There's imagery there if we can see it. The picture for church, the word church also comes from the Scottish word kirk, K-I-R-K, which is also where you get the word circle, and circus, which has to do with a ring. The ecclesia, the episunagage in Greek, is where we get the word synagogue, which has to do with a collection of other individuals around a central theme. It's the same exact picture of the spokes on the wheel. And then if you look at Ahasuerus, it says it hit Xerxes, Esther's king, Esther's husband. It says his reign went from Cush to, I think it was Hodu or India. I was like, wait a second. Maybe there's a message in there too. And if you look a little closer in the red dictionary, it'll say, well, this comes from this word and this comes from that. But it's like one is a spindle and the other one is this round thing. And it's like, wait a minute, that's the same picture again. And it's the same picture as the letter Kuf. The letters are embedded in these words that are in the story. And if you don't know Hebrew, you'll never see it. Someone can tell you that you're there, but when you find them yourself, like what Gordon's doing, and some other people, it's like when you find one little thing, it explodes with significance. And what I'm saying is it's not a matter of like, how do you find the trail? This thing is so interwoven, it is so deep, that you can look anywhere because every letter is tied together. Every single word in the Scripture, every single letter in the Scripture is a porthole to every other word and every other letter. And it's not like, gee, I found these 10 that are so important. It's like, I think I've just found the key to the door. It's the beginning. You see, there's a word, again, we'll maybe get to it later. We've got 3 minutes left here. The word that means the goal, it's Sair, which is Shin Ayin Resh. It's where you get the word for Esau, which also means the gate or the entrance, or like the title page of a book, which is like the columns of the temple. But it also means horrible and ugly and to storm and rage and terrify. But it also means, you might say the goalpost, so it's like, oh, that's the end. Once you make the goal, it's over. It's like, it means the beginning for us to come back to this goal of the Seir of Yahweh, which is this other word in this verse in Psalm 118, which we're going to hopefully get really into in this next part. Psalm 118 is all about the circle around coming back to the understanding of the regard of Yahweh's words, which is the goalpost, but it's just the beginning. The word for the two pillars, according you can read in the dictionary, were Boaz and Yakin, and Yakin has to do with yes, I can, and Boaz has to do with the incorporation of Bet Ayin Zion, which is glory, splendor, might. It's like to see what is the capacity of the potential of what Yahweh, who He is and what He's given to His people in His glorious splendor, like these goalposts. It's the beginning. It's the goal. Yeshua came to fulfill or to accomplish or to make that goal and say, see, I've opened, it's right there. There's the path. I've opened up the portal. Now you guys can do this too. And right after Him, everybody spun out and blew it. And we've stumbled until now. The point is, what I really believe is that if we know the proper meanings of the letters, according to the Mishkan pattern, that this is like the letters are identified by the identity of Yeshua, the Mashiach. Without Him, I can say, well, it's tied to the festivals, the days of creation, and the Mishkan, but they find their identity in Yeshua Himself, and you can't separate the two. To say, oh, it's just the festivals and the Mashiach, or the festivals and the days of creation, if you don't see that, this goes back to Ayin Dalet, Ayin Tav, catch 22. If you see Yeshua said, I am the Dalet, I am the door, understand me, He is the one who identifies, meaning all these letters, but all these letters identify Him. So you realize that the 7 days, the 7 festivals, and so forth are confirming who He is. And when you put the two together, that's the entrance to coming back to what Israel lost. The reason for this class is to understand the Mishkan pattern so that we can understand this mysterious code which has been hidden, secreted away, and concealed until the time that Israel would choose to come back to Yahweh and regard the truth and the blessing and the honor that He promised to give us if we just do what He said. And it's all in this pattern. We're a punk break.